And so the beginning of Tanya begins with kind of laying down all the facts for us, right? So we started off by describing the godly soul and what holiness is. And in chapter 6, we said, okay, now that we described the godly soul and the godly energies, let's take some time to talk about what's countering the godly energies around us. So we began by talking about the animal soul, or a term I recently heard that resonated well is the animal consciousness within us. And chapter 6 told us that the animal consciousness within us is really a mirror image of our godly soul, because our world has a balance of these energies in order to allow for true free choice. Everything that you'll find in holiness, you'll find a counter of it in the opposite of holiness. So the godly soul's mirror image is going to be the animal soul, or our animal consciousness. They're set up pretty much the same, meaning, sorry, somebody is talking. Okay, hey baby, brought my handy dandy little, let's see if we can get him to relax. 1 second, baby. It's okay, baby. I'm gonna try. He just want to hear Tanya. He just wants to be here and listen. I think he wants a better spot, like a little closer up. So what are we up to? Oh, so we're talking about that everything is equal, and the godly soul and the animal soul are kind of, they're set up pretty much the same with some small differences. What's going on? What's going on? Now you do.
He spoke up on animal soul, just so you know.
I'm gonna call my SOS. Oh, okay. Okay. So funny, because I was thinking, like, when he was born and when I was in labor, I was thinking through that whole beginning of Tanya. The beginning of Tanya talks about how when a child is born and the discussion that they have, and the angels tell them. Yeah, yeah, right here. He just needs to sleep, honestly. He's so tired. So I was thinking about all these discussions about the discussion that the child's soul is having with the angels, and how the angels are telling it, you're going to this world, you have all the potential, and you have all this, like all of these things. And I was like, that's going on like now, like inside me. It was just like a very powerful thought to think about. Definitely helps get your mind off labor, like when you can think of these, beautiful concepts and ideas. Anyway, so we said that what's similar about the animal soul and the godly soul is that their basic makeup is the same, whereas there's the intellectual part, the emotional part, and then the action. And we said that, we think about something and our thoughts influence our feelings, and then our feelings ultimately lead to expression, typically in action or in speaking. We said that the difference, though, between the godly soul and the animal soul is where the idea begins. In the godly soul, in holy matters, it all has to begin in the mind. You don't wake up one day and just have this feeling of, oh my God, I want to go pray. I mean, typically, if you do, it's because you spent a lot of time thinking or learning about something that inspired that idea. It's not a feeling that a person just has naturally. Typically, you have to learn about something, you have to understand it. That will lead to, or give birth to, as the Tanya calls it, emotion. And then the emotion, when the emotion is nurtured, then that leads to action. With our animal consciousness, though, usually the idea begins in the heart. It usually begins with, I really want that, that item, that food, that activity, that vacation, whatever it is. there still is the intellectual emotional relationship where after it begins in the heart, it kind of travels back to the mind, firstly to help plan out, like, okay, how am I going to get myself that thing that I want? And also, there is a balance, meaning I can't desire something that I don't know about. I can't, only when I hear about this great, amazing vacation spot can I start desiring to go there. But if I never heard about it, I won't desire it. So there still is the direct influence of the intellect on the emotion, but the idea won't necessarily start with the intellect. It often will start with the emotion. It's much more visceral. Like you just get into the mood of something. You don't need to have a tremendous amount of knowledge or studying, to decide that you want a certain type of cheesecake, or whatever, fill in the blank. And the other thing that Tanya says is that it is still the desires are still commensurate with your knowledge and your understanding of the world. So for example, a young child, the greatest desire that they have is a candy or a toy, or some, my 4-year-old spent a week dreaming about a trip to Five Below to buy a certain $5 toy. And he was like dreaming about it. And then we told him we're gonna take him on Sunday. He woke up Sunday morning dancing. Today is the day. Today is the day. And I was thinking like, okay, like, look how excited he gets about a trip to the store around the corner to buy a $5 toy. But as we get older, we get smarter, we know about more things and concepts, and then our desires grow as well. But other than that, pretty much, they operate pretty much in the same way. Now, the second part of last chapter started talking about the world, how the world is divided. And the Tanya said something pretty radical. Typically, if you ask anyone, even someone who's involved in Jewish life, right? Divide the world into categories. Typically, the discussion would sound something like, well, there are holy things, there are unholy things, and then there's just a bunch of stuff in the middle, like just things that are just okay to do. They're not Jewish. They're not Jewish. They're just whatever, work and vacation and sports and, just regular stuff, leisure activities, things that are not necessarily good, not necessarily bad. That's how we tend to see the world. What the Tanya tells us, which is new, is that actually there is no middle ground. The world, everything is going to fall into one of two categories. It's either godly or it's not godly. Now, not godly doesn't mean evil. It just means it's not godly. Something that is godly or holy, that means it's clearly revealing holiness. You look at that item, you don't need any explanation. You know this is a holy activity. It's a good thing. It's a holy thing. It just reflects God and godliness. And if it's unholy or ungodly, then it's just not. You look at that thing and you don't know that this thing or this item or this, activity is a holy thing. And while it does sound very radical, it's like, okay, so are we expected now to just, I don't know, walk around and pray and study all day and we can't have any normal conversations that are not, studying conversations? The Tanya begins in last chapter and really focuses on in this chapter saying, no, that's not the idea. The idea is that we're in this world for a purpose. And our purpose in this world is to engage with all of these gray area items that are just mundane. And it's our job to elevate them. So we're not supposed to be living in this bubble where we're only studying and praying all day. We're supposed to be engaging in all types of activities, except for those activities that are specifically not allowed. But you're supposed to engage in a whole variety of activities. But our job is, and our unique human ability, and I would say even unique Jewish ability, is to infuse godliness into each of these areas. Because if you remember from previous discussions, what sets us apart, every single thing in creation is a creation. Everything was created. It's all stuff that God created. When we have a godly soul inside of us that's actually a piece of God, there's a part of us that's part of the creator, not creation. So we are the only ones poised with this ability to now bring godliness and holiness into all of these mundane areas. Yes, Sarah.
Well, I just realized my camera's off. Sorry about that. So I just wanted to share that this can be made age appropriate, because of what happened this afternoon slash evening with my kids.
Okay.
Apparently, some families have a habit of naming their car. Sure. And my kids wanted to know if our car had a name, and I said, no. And the comment was because they couldn't come up with a Jewish name for the car that would be appropriate. Yeah, that's the reason. Anyway, so when the reason given was no, it's because the car is not Jewish, another child said, well, how do you know? And I said, that's a good question, because we're driving to a Jewish school, we're driving to a kosher restaurant, we're driving to a Torah class. Maybe the car is Jewish after all. And they started thinking about the car in a different context, I think, because now they said, yeah, we could either do, bad things with the car, or we can do good things with the car. And so I think that was a really good opportunity to kind of teach them at an age appropriate level. You can use things for the power of good, or not good.
I love that, Sarah, especially because the Tanya also uses a term that you become a vehicle for
Right.
holiness or for unholiness. So the car totally fits in there. I'm going to show this slide that I've shown before. It's not great, but I find it as one of my, for anyone who's looking for a visual, it might just give you a little bit of a visual. So let me just make sure I see everybody. Sorry. Somehow when okay, I can't see you guys, but if you need to say something, just unmute yourselves. Basically, if we had to take the whole world and divide it into categories, generally there's two categories. There's the holy, clear and pure holiness, and then there is the unholy. The term that the Tana uses for that is sitra achra, meaning the other side, which in a way is like a non-definition. It's not calling it evil, bad. It's just saying the other side. It's just not holy. It's not clearly holy. Now we all know that the entire world, and the Tanya says this many times, the entire world is energized through godliness. Everything is godly. Everything has godly energy. If it wasn't getting godly energy, it would not be here. Now, the question is the godly energy seen or is it not seen? Something that is holy has revealed godly energy. It is clear as day. You see this as a holy item. Everything that's in the category of sitra achra, the other side, means that there's some kind of shell over the godliness of this item so that it's not apparent that this is a holy item. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because within this umbrella area of the other side, there are different types of shells that each of these things have. And just like we know with, fruit, there are fruit that have thin shells. Think about the thick, coconut shell versus the thin, like I bought a huge bag of pistachios because we were getting ready for this pistachio chocolate night. So I was showing my kids how there's two levels to the shell. There's like the hard shell, and then there's like this thinner shell on the inside that when we make coconut cream, we actually try to remove as much of it as possible so we don't have those little pieces in the coconut cream. But think of like that inner shell of the pistachio, or I'm sure you could think of many other fruits. There are thinner shells, there are thicker shells, some are more translucent, some are less, some are impossible to crack, some take a little bit more effort, some take less effort, and that will determine how covered up the godliness in the item is. Some things, they look impossible. Like I can't like they just deny God's existence. There's no way. It's so hard to believe that there's godliness inside of it. And some things, it's like, okay, if you put it that way, I can see it. And then what the Tanya went on to describe last time is the two general categories that we have within the Sitra Achra, within this area, otherwise known as also klipa, which klipa in Hebrew is shell or skin. The two general categories are as follows. There's a small minority, which is called the three completely unholy klipot. That's what I put here in the dark gray. Those are things that, yes, we know they're powered by godliness because the whole world is, But God clearly tells us, the Torah says these items are prohibited. Certain foods that are prohibited, certain activities that are prohibited. These things are, yes, they're powered by godliness, but no, you shouldn't even touch them. Don't even try to elevate them. They're not for you. Vast majority of our life, though, takes place in this middle area called the Klipat Noga. I see we wrote last time, the Parav Klipa. It's got a shell. You could remove the shell and reveal that it's godly, or you can kind of keep the shell on and reinforce the fact that this doesn't seem very godly or holy. Most areas in our life fall into this category. Most things in our life cannot get a label of good or bad, holy or unholy. Most things are just kind of somewhere in the middle. And our job is not to leave it that way. Our job is to go in there into this mundane area and see how much of it we can elevate and how much of it we can bring God, reveal the godliness in. And that's kind of where chapter 7 begins. Chapter 7 really focuses on talking about this area. How do we do this? How do we go? What are these things? Chapter 7 is going to give some examples as well of different things that could be used one way or could be used another way, and the effects are different. Before we start chapter 7, I want to share a story. There was a man named Rabbi Avraham Hamalach, Rabbi Avraham the angel. He was a son of the Mizracher Maggid. You can imagine what kind of personality he was, that he was nicknamed by everyone the angel, because that's, he was an amazing and very, very holy person. So stories told about him when he was a young child, that he was playing with friends, and in the middle of the game, he came to his father crying hysterically. And his father says, Avram, or Avramelech, what happened to you? And he says, we were playing hide and seek, and no one found me. I was the one hiding, and none of my friends found me. So his father said, that's great. That means you won the game. He said, no, you don't understand. They stopped looking for me. I was hidden so well, they didn't find me. They stopped looking. This story was actually told over by the Lubavitch Rebbe a few times. And every time the Rebbe would tell the story, he would get very emotional about it. And he said, we are living in a world where God hid himself. We know that everything's holy, but godliness is hidden. And we've reached a point where sometimes, yes, there are those who are inspired to seek out and find the holiness and find the godliness. But sometimes the godliness is so well hidden that there are plenty of people that just give up looking. They don't even try. They take the world at face value. They look at, the material goodness around us that thankfully we have plenty of. They look at it as at face value, and they don't try to look deeper. They don't try to go deeper. They don't try to become more sensitive and see what's truly lying underneath. And, with the Rebbe saying this, kind of like turn to God in this conversation and say, God, it's time to stop the game. Like, we don't want to reach a point where we stop looking. Like, you're so well hidden. Just reveal yourself already. Like, let's call it game over, and let's move the world to the next stage. So I think this is a great story to start off this chapter, where this chapter is about, we could go through our lives not looking, it's very easy to get lost and just say, whatever, I'm not going to think so deeply. I'm not going to look so deeply. Life is life, work is work, fun is fun, entertainment is entertainment. I don't have to start looking for the godly spark and everything. For most of us, though, we do come to a point where we're looking, like we want to go deeper. We're looking for something more meaningful. And ultimately, our nature will kind of push us to look deeper, because if we have a godly soul inside of us, that godly soul is not going to be quiet forever. So maybe it's not alive and awake all the time, but every so often we do get a spark of inspiration, and we want to find something deeper, something more meaningful. Like, where am I really going, and what am I really trying to accomplish? So, that's where Tanya comes in, and chapter 7 kind of breaks it down for us and says, okay, let's look at this life that we have, and let's look beyond the shell. Like, what's really underneath all of this, and how can we connect to those energies? How can we be in touch with it? We want to be in touch. Our natural state, the natural state of our soul, is to be in touch with these godly realities. It's unnatural for us to live in a very, very, secular physical world that's, you know, completely out of alignment with spirituality. So I actually was recently listening to someone, I don't remember who it was, but they were talking about Tanya, and, you know, how Tanya, like, you know, how it gives so much guidance in life on so many levels. And they were saying how people who study Tanya, they study it and they often forget to stop and do the meditation part. Tanya talks so much about meditating, right? We didn't get up to it yet in these chapters, but as the chapters go on, Tanya is telling us so many truths that exist. And then it tells us you need to, with your godly soul, right? You need to use your intellect to meditate on these truths, think about them, and then you'll start feeling it, and you'll put yourself in touch with it, and you'll be able to act on it. And so many of us study the Tanya and we don't take the time to actually close our eyes and say, okay, now I'm going to meditate on these ideas. Let me take a few minutes every morning, a few minutes every evening, a few minutes in the middle of the day. When I'm praying is a great time to do this. Let me take time to kind of get in touch with this knowledge of what's at the core. So definitely the things we're going to be learning today are good food for meditation. You know, if you want something to really, you know, sit and think about and focus when you wake up in the morning or before you go to sleep at night, these are great ideas that you need to think about for them to really enter your brain so that they can really start to affect you. Otherwise, you can kind of gloss over them. It's like, oh, a nice book, I read it, great. You know, what's the next one? But when we really take time to think about it and let it penetrate us, it changes. It changes us. It changes our approach to life. It changes our daily interactions. So let's read a little bit of it inside. I actually liked I thought it was a very easy read, the beginning of this chapter. I will share my screen. Okay, chapter 7. I don't know why it's like, okay, now I see it. I have this thing, every time I share my screen, it like hides all the people and then I can't see anybody, but I think I just figured it out. Okay, so chapter 7 begins. However, unlike the life forms mentioned at the conclusion of chapter 6 spoke about the unholy klipot, you know, the part of the klipot that's off limits for us. Don't touch that. The following life forms are derived from klipat noga. This is what's in this middle category. The vitalizing animal soul in the Jew, which is derived from the side of klipa, which clothes itself in the human being's blood, as stated above. In other words, our animal consciousness, again, is not evil. It's not even rooted in the negative klipa. It's in that neutral zone. It's like the animal inside me. It's just an animal. It's not bad. It's not good either. I can utilize it in a holy way, or I can utilize it in the opposite of holiness. And the soul of animals, beasts, birds, and fish, which are pure according to the laws of the Torah and thus permitted for Jewish consumption. So this is interesting, telling us, and again, something that's in the negative klipa, like in the dark husk and shell that we put all the way, that gray area at the end, they're not necessarily bad things. Some of them are, you know, some evil is in there, but they're just things that the Torah says these cannot be elevated. So for example, unkosher animals stem from that level of klipa. There's nothing wrong with them, but they just don't have the ability to be elevated to godliness. They derive their energy from the negative klipa. Unlike those, kosher animals, kosher birds, kosher fish, which can be used for holy purposes, they derive their energy from that klipat noga, that gray area. Also, the existence and vitality of everything in the inanimate and the vegetable world that is permissible for consumption. So you'll notice that everything, we've discussed this in the past, but the Kabbalah generally describes creation in 4 levels. There are the inanimate objects, then there is the plant kingdom, then there's the animals, and on top of that is the human. It kind of goes in level of sophistication of creation. In the inanimate level, everything, none of that is from the negative klipa. They're all general. Stones, rocks, anything you see out in nature that doesn't have life in it is 100% in that part of category that can go either way. When it comes to vegetation and plants, vast majority are in that category, except for certain plant items that are considered forbidden according to the Torah. For example, the fruits of a tree in the first 3 years of its life, because we're not supposed to you're not supposed to eat the fruits of a tree during the first 3 years of life. The first 3 years, you're supposed to just kind of let the fruit grow, and only after 3 years can you begin to enjoy the fruit. So during those first 3 years, the fruit then is deriving its energy source from the negative klipa that doesn't have the ability to be elevated. But after that, it goes into klipat noga. And then when it comes to animals, it's divided. There's the kosher animals and the non-kosher animals. So too, the existence and vitality of every act, utterance, and thought in mundane matters that contain no forbidden aspect. Anything that I will say or do or think about that is not specifically forbidden by the Torah. It's not a mitzvah, but it's not forbidden. All of those things are going to be in this category of that klipat noga, that middle ground category. And again, the Tanya is very specific. It's not directly prohibited by the Torah, and it's not indirectly prohibited by the Torah. Some things are not clearly specified in the Torah, but then rabbinic prohibitions explain to us that those things are prohibited. Those things as well are in the 3 unclean klipot. But anything that the Torah never tells us that it's not okay, and that's the vast majority of activities, that all goes into that middle category. Yet when these permitted thoughts and utterances or acts, now, when they are not performed for the sake of heaven, they stay in that general category, in klipat noga. If these activities are done for self-indulgence, and of course, for negativity, if I take a rock and I use it to hurt someone, I just took the energy of that rock and I dragged it down to the negative klipot. If I use that rock in order to decorate my synagogue, I just use that energy for something holy. If I use that rock just to play with rocks, the energy stayed in that middle category, in the klipat noga. Okay, but here's talking about still when it's in that klipat noga, if they're only used to serve the will, desire, and the lust of the body, even where it is the need of the body and necessary for its very preservation of life, such as eating, which the body requires for its existence, without it, which it cannot possibly live. Thus, the act itself cannot be faulted, but fault lies in his intention that is not for the sake of heaven, meaning not to use his body as an instrument for the service of God. So, for example, the activity of eating, which is a very easy example. Assuming that the food is kosher, is this the activity of eating? Is it deriving energy from klipa or from holiness? Now, the Tanya is telling us, even if my purpose in eating is to say, I need to live, I am eating so I can live, I still haven't elevated the energy in that food. It still is in the non-holy. It still is in the klipa. The only way that I can elevate the energy in that food is if I eat it with the intention to use that energy for positive. So if I'm eating that food because I want to eat this food so that I have the energy and the ability to pray, to serve God, to take care of my family, to, be involved in positive things, that intention alone will now take the energy that's in that food, that's in the eating activity, and elevate it. I just elevated an entire domain. If I ate the food without thinking, or even worse, I ate the food just because I wanted to indulge. It was just delicious and I just wanted to indulge myself. It's not necessarily bad, but it's definitely not holy. And I did not elevate the energy in that food or in that eating activity through doing this. If the spiritual intent is absent, then all these acts, utterances, and thoughts are no better than the vitalizing animal soul itself. They just stay in that category. I wasn't able to move the energy. There is so much, when we're sensitive to it and when we're attuned to it, there's energy all around us. There's spiritual energy everywhere. And everything is getting its vitality. Everything is getting energy from somewhere and giving energy to somewhere. We as humans, we have the unique ability to start to transfer energy, to allow the energy to kind of pull energy up, or God forbid, to pull the energy down. We have the ability to really change that energy, spiritual energy dynamic around us wherever we go. And when we engage in these activities, specifically through our intention, we have the ability to make this happen. Because in this world, the world of Asiya, the world of action, most, indeed, almost all the Klipat Noga is evil with only a little bit of good intermingled in. If we're going to go back to our that little chart that I was showing, that whole middle category, that gray klipa, the Tanya tells us, what it's comprised of, the energy, is mostly bad energy with some good mixed into it. So it's not evil and it's not good. It's kind of a mix. And we have the ability to kind of identify and uplift the energy to good, or drag the energy down through our actions, but really more importantly, through our intentions. I'm going to stop for a minute to discuss this and take questions, but I wanted to say that you realize that in a way it's asking a lot, but it's not asking a lot. All you have to do to change, to transfer energy to positive, to infuse holiness in things around me, is to have a holy intention when I'm using that. So in a way, it's just a thought. Like it's not so much, but it's everything. Intentionality really makes a difference. I heard a cute story, just, I don't know, I guess it's some joke that someone saw in like a children's comic book, but kind of illustrated this pretty well. So there's a comic of this woman in the old shtetl who goes to hang her laundry, and she sees that her laundry line broke or ripped. So she calls her husband and says, like, hey, help, I need you to get me a new laundry line. And I guess the comic kind of portrays her husband as this kind of like aloof, out of touch guy who's, basically does really silly things. So he says, oh, sure, no problem. I'll get you a new laundry line. And he goes for a walk and he starts looking for laundry lines. Where does he look? He looks up. Do I see any laundry lines for sale? And as he approaches the edge of the village, he sees these wires high up that were actually army communication lines. So he's like, oh, look at those laundry lines. Those look pretty strong. And the poles holding them up, those poles don't look like they need laundry lines to keep them up. I'm going to go up there and cut my wife some new laundry lines. So he climbs up, he takes out his little knife, and he's about to cut the laundry line. And of course, within a second, there's like soldiers and officers. He's fully surrounded, and they arrest him and they take him down. And oh my goodness, you must be a spy. You must be a traitor. You're like cutting off army communication lines. Like, this is going to get the biggest punishment, the most jail time ever. And they bring him in front of a judge, and the judge says, so, Beryl, tell us what you were doing. He's like, I don't know why they're making such a big fuss. I was just trying to cut some new laundry lines for my wife. And the judge looks at him and laughs and says, all right, let the guy go. He's just a fool. And if you think about it, the same action, cutting army communication lines, I mean, that would be, in other circumstances, punishable by the highest level of punishment. But as soon as they realize what his intention was, they're like, nothing. You could just go. But just, we'll have to teach you where to get real laundry lines. So yeah, intention, in a way, it's such a minor thing, but it's everything. Because the way we approach things and the way we do things, well, it ends up affecting how we do things and how they affect others. But on a spiritual level, we're literally affecting the transfer of energy all around us, the energies that we're connecting to and we're drawing from, the energies that we're giving to. And it's a pretty powerful power that we have to do this. I want to hear your thoughts and questions before we go on. Clear as day. Yes, Harriet.
I was going to say that the same thing happened to me in terms of hiding when I was probably 5 or 6, and I hid so well that my sisters and friend that was there stopped looking for me. And I was in my 40s before I realized it was not a good thing. And it was partly I was like, I won. But it was partly when I started to study my relationship with God and got deeper into a spiritual path that it hit me. And I thought, boy, if I was traumatized by that experience, I can only imagine what God times however many people is experiencing in terms of God is hidden and we're not looking for God.
Wow. Well, he does have the power to unhide himself, so, you know.
I had the power also, but which I finally did because
Oh, you just muted yourself accidentally.
I said I had the power to
To unhide
unhide myself, but not until after I was traumatized and realized they were all sitting at the kitchen table having a lovely dinner, and I'm behind drapes, feeling very lost and alone.
The next thing that Tanya is going to tell us, which again I believe it spoke about in an earlier chapter as well, because this klipat noga is a mix. There's like good and bad mixed into it. It's not all bad and it's not all good. It's actually mostly bad and some good. It's going to tell us that therefore our animal soul, our animal consciousness, which is generally, it's not the holy one, right? It's kind of like the negative side of us, also has some good characteristics in it. For example, the animal consciousness of a Jewish person specifically, we have our unique brand of our animal consciousness, has characteristics that a Jewish person has that don't necessarily come from the godly soul. Jewish people are known we're described in multiple places as Rachmanim, Baishanim, and Gomlei Chasadim. It says the nature of the Jewish people the right translation is they're merciful, they're modest, and they are kind. They do kindness. And the Tanya says that these characteristics that the Jewish nation is known for, they're great characteristics. They're not necessarily coming from the godly soul. They're actually part of our nature. Part of our animal nature are those characteristics, meaning that when we do those actions, when we are very kind and benevolent and merciful, we're not necessarily doing it only because, oh, God said we should, and I want to do what God says. In our very nature, just like our animal consciousness is wired to want to eat and survive and sleep and do well, the Jewish one is also wired to want to do kindness for others. It's part of our nature. It's part of who we are. There's I think it's a medrash that talks about this, that says, the Jewish people, when they were in the desert and they were asked to contribute to the golden calf, what did they do? They just gave. They gave their gold. Here, take it, go. Do whatever you need to do. And then years later, when they were asked to contribute to build the tabernacle, what did they do? They gave. So they said, look at these people. They're like, you can't hold them accountable. They're just giving people. They're just benevolent. Whatever you ask them for, they'll give. Like, don't hold them so accountable for giving to the golden calf. When they're asked to give for the temple, they also give for the temple. That's in their nature. They like to give. So the Tanya touches upon this here to say that, that part of us, again, if I'm giving and I'm doing kindness and goodness because I want to do it for a holy purpose, I know it's a mitzvah and I want to do it for the mitzvah, yes, that's coming from my godly soul. But also in our animal consciousness, we have this desire to do good that just comes from from the klipat noga, which I thought was interesting because, I think it's come up sometimes in this class. And we know, like, it's just even a known thing in society that Jewish people in general, obviously it's a generalization, they're always carrying they're always setting up Jewish family services and all these organizations just to help people and to be kind and to take people in. And yeah, it could be a mitzvah. It doesn't have to be a mitzvah. All depends on your intention and why you're doing it. So that's an interesting thing that's touched upon here. Ultimately, I want to continue reading some of the examples that the Tanya gives about how to use different things, you know, for the right reason or for the wrong reason. Ultimately, from what the Tanya describes, in a way, it would be easier to kind of escape to a ghetto and not engage with the mundane world and just spend our entire time sitting in yeshiva, studying, praying, doing holy things. In a way, that's easier. You're in a bubble. That's just what you're doing. You're not really engaging with the world. But what the Tanya is describing here, that our real purpose in life is not to sit in a bubble. The reason we were brought into this world, the reason we were given the circumstances that we were given, the families that we were given, the means that we were given, the connections that we have, the talents that we each have, is for us to take our little piece of the world, the part of the world that we have access to, and we have to elevate it. And in order to do that, we must engage with the world. We need to go out there. And it's tricky because once you go out into the world, it's very easy to kind of forget to look. You know, once the glitz gets glitzier and once the desires grow and the list of the types of vacations I could go on could really grow tremendously and I have more knowledge and more desires, it becomes pretty easy to just stop looking and stop trying to find a deeper inner meaning. But that is our mission. Our mission is to be in the world and to constantly evaluate. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? Am I doing this for the right reason? And to be able to make sure that we're taking these energies and drawing them up to the right place. Yes, Lorraine.
So Lisa and I were just talking about this exact topic today, that there's this philosophy of let them. And so when you were saying the thing about the mundane or people that just don't get it, or people that, you know, you're on your path and you're trying to stay on your path and the godly path, and you're trying to be intentional and do what you know is best for Lisa. Can I out you for this little child? Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. So Lisa has a child that is in special education, and she's been working very hard for a very long time to get him the services that he needs. I used to be an attorney for children with special needs, and so I am deeply committed to this issue. So we were talking about this issue. Well, there's a teacher that's just blocking her at every single thing she's doing, and she's just trying to do right. And I just said, let her say whatever horrible thing she's saying to you. Let her, but you keep doing the right thing. You keep pushing for his rights. And finally, she has a 504 plan, which is the first step legally in getting him his rights and what he needs. But it's been a year of Lisa working and pushing against the system and against someone who's really not using that godly soul and that intentionality. And, you know, and so I think this happens often in all of our lives. We just so happen to be discussing this little child again today. And I think when you bump up, I know, Lola, when you bump up against people who don't understand your intention, or maybe don't have the Jewish godly soul that sees what you need to be doing in this moment. Not, I don't want to make it like bigger than life, but in this moment to keep doing the right thing. And I was like, just keep saying, let them throw up another block against you. Keep pushing, keep doing the right thing for this little boy. Let them. And so anyway, finally he's getting a 504 plan. So
Is getting a 504 plan, but you're right. You know, later the Tanya talks about how to avoid getting angry at people like that, right? Because the natural reaction is to get really annoyed at those people.
wait, say that again, Lisa. Did you hear that line?
Part
You
of the
can't,
Tanya's
you can't
mindset.
get angry at the Marians of the world. They don't know.
But here's the logic. Here's the logic why you can't get angry. Because if if we believe that everything that happens is for a reason, I am where I am in the circumstances that I am for a specific reason, and I'm engaging and meeting certain people and certain situations, and it's all for a reason. None of this is by mistake. So I need to realize that the fact, like this person who you're interacting with, who's being so difficult, see them as another obstacle in the environment, meaning they're choosing to do the wrong thing. That's on them. That's something they're going to have to answer to. But from your perspective, to you, they're just another obstacle that you have to deal with. And we have to accept that this obstacle was put in my way for a reason. Maybe to get me to work harder, maybe because, I don't know. I can't answer why this obstacle, but just like certain situations are put in our way that are difficult people are also situations that were put in our way that we have to deal with. And the only way not to get angry at them is to realize that what they're going to be judged for, they're going to be judged for. That's not my business. From my perspective, this is part of the path that God carved out for me. So what am I getting angry at? Getting angry at God for putting this in my path? They're choosing to be the messenger. Again, that's on them, but if they didn't choose it, then someone else would choose it. Like that obstacle would be there because God wants that obstacle to be there for me. I wanted to just take a few minutes before the end of the class to read through the examples that the Tanya gives. Let's see. Sorry. Okay, so for instance, if one eats, the first example Tanya gives is about food. If one eats fat beef and drinks spiced wine, not out of physical desire, but in order to broaden his mind for the service of God and for his Torah. As Rava said, Rava was a sage in the Talmud, wine and fragrance make my mind more receptive. Or so if someone says, you know what, in order for me to study Torah, I need some really good steak and some, really expensive wine. And they will indulge in that steak and the wine for the purpose of being able to study. Or I need some really good chocolate to get me to come out and, do and spend time with Jewish women in a pre-Hanukkah celebration where we're going to talk about Hanukkah and do mitzvahs together. So, and I need that chocolate to help me, get in the mood for it. That's great. Eating that chocolate has now become a very positive thing. The energy in the chocolate, the energy it took to make the chocolate, the energy it takes me to eat the chocolate, and the same is with the steak and the wine and whatever it is. I need a really good vacation in order for me to be able to prepare for Passover. If that's my intention in planning this vacation or taking this vacation or getting this manicure or spending time at the spa or doing the shopping, whatever it is, then that entire experience that I'm engaging in, all the energy there, I am now able to uplift and make holy, which is a fascinating thing. Now, you have to be honest with yourself though, right? I can't say, oh my God, I'm really in the mood of that steak. All right, let me say it's for Torah study. Great, let's eat the steak, right? It takes a lot of, you need to take some time to be honest with yourself and think, where's this desire coming from? Is this just like a gluttonous desire? Or is this a desire that's coming really because I really want to do the holy thing and I'm trying to help myself get there? So Rava was a sage in the Talmud, and he said, in order for me to be able to really study Torah, I need some good meat and wine. That's what I need to get me to study Torah. And therefore, his indulgence in the meat and wine was not just permissible, it was fantastic. It was a great thing. Another example connected to food is in order to fulfill the commandment to enjoy the Shabbat and festivals. If I am eating delicious food in order to enjoy a holiday or in order to enjoy Shabbat, guess what? It's a mitzvah. The difference between the first and second example is that the first example is a little indirect. It's in order to get me to do a mitzvah. And the second example is actually eating the indulgent food to enjoy Shabbat and holiday. It becomes a mitzvah in itself. So I would say the next time I have a desire for something really, I actually did this with my kids recently. We went to the store and they saw I don't remember, some treat they really wanted. And I'm like, great. we're going to get this and we're going to save it for Shabbat. This is going to be our special Shabbat treat. You know, I know, I'm sure I'm not the only one that does that, but I wanted them to get into this mindset of we can enjoy great things in life, but let's try to use them for a good reason. So that's this example of eating and drinking. The next example, okay, here, when one eats and drinks in the above mentioned manner, then the vitality of the meat and the wine, which originated in Klipat Noga, is then extracted from the evil and ascends to God like a burnt offering and sacrifice. Literally, the energy that you are bringing up and elevating through this activity, it's as if you went to the temple and brought up a sacrifice. So too concerning speech. This is another example, not about food, but about speech, specifically about jokes. The vitality of the words spoken for a sacred purpose ascend and absorbed in sanctity. For example, he who makes a humorous remark. You can make a humorous remark for different things. You could try to poke fun at someone. You could try to tease someone. You could say a joke because, you know, you want people to like you. Those are all self-serving reasons. Or you can say a humorous remark to sharpen his mind and make his heart rejoice in God and his Torah and service, which should be practiced joyfully. I am going to tell a joke because that is my way of really being able to personalize the material the Torah that I'm studying. And again, we have a story about Rava, who was a sage, and he was known, as Rava was wont to do with his pupils, prefacing his discourse with a humorous remark. Every time he started a class, there was always a joke first. Obviously, the joke has to be a clean joke and a kosher joke, right? But he would specifically tell a joke first so that the students became cheerful, and thereby they were more receptive and better able to understand the discourse. He knew he's about to teach them some really heavy, deep stuff, and telling them a joke will kind of lighten the mood and make everybody more open. So again, it's all in the intention. I could say the same thing or do the same thing. For God, I just transfer that whole energy to godliness. Not for godliness, well, I could pull down that energy. There's a story about, there was a group of people known as in Hebrew, they were called Prushim. I think the English translation is like asceticists, like people who would separate themselves. It's like in the 1600s, people who would separate themselves from the community. They were Jewish leaders typically, and they were very afraid of being kind of dragged down into the mundane Jewish community, influencing them negatively or not being able to study enough Torah. So they would seclude themselves and isolate themselves and spend all their time studying Torah, not really engaging with the world, not really engaging with other people. And often they would have practices of trying to torture is a hard word, but do things to show that they're not going to enjoy the physical world because they want to fully dedicate their life to holiness and godliness. So there's a story of one such guy. The Hebrew word for them is a parush. One of this parush, this man who was known to do this. One of the practices that he took upon himself, besides for living this very secluded lifestyle, he always made sure to wear some sackcloth under his shirt. Sackcloth is very itchy material. And his purpose is just to not enjoy physical clothes, not to enjoy the physical world. Anyway, one day, a great rabbi was coming to town, and the parush went to meet him. He wanted to meet the rabbi. And in meeting with the rabbi, he kind of made sure to pull his shirt down a little bit, make sure that his sackcloth was sticking out, just enough that the rabbi would see who he's dealing with. And the rabbi sees this, and as they're talking, the rabbi says, "Oh, he's very clever." And they keep talking. And then a few minutes later, he says again, "Oh, he is so clever." And finally, this man says, "Who are you talking about? Who's so clever?" He's like, "The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is so clever. He even managed to get you in his shirt." What the rabbi was telling him is, if you're wearing sackcloth because you're really trying to do something holy, which we won't talk about, that's not really the Jewish way, and definitely the Tanya discourages that greatly. But if you're really doing it because you're doing it for God, then you're doing it for God. But apparently here, you're not doing it for God. You're doing it for other people. You want other people to see you a certain way and view you a certain way. So in other words, what the Tanya is telling us is you could live a very, very meager, simple lifestyle. You could eat black bread and drink water all day and sleep on the floor, and you could still not be serving God. You could still be actually fully self-indulgent in these behaviors because you're doing it to feel good about yourself. You're doing it to get a certain status in the community. You're doing it so that people view you a certain way. And on the flip side, you could live a very luxurious lifestyle. You can have a beautiful home and dress in beautiful clothes and go on plenty of vacations, and you could still be serving God every single moment of your life. Because if you have access to luxury, go ahead, enjoy it, use it for a godly purpose. Even more so, the reason God gave you access to such luxury is He made you the messenger to be able to elevate these vacation areas, to be able to elevate, this field and business, to be able to elevate your home. Like there's so much that you can do with that kind of access that you have. It's not so much about what you do. It's about seeing what you have, being honest with yourself, and doing it for the right reason. And in doing it for the right reason, we have the ability to bring godliness everywhere. We can literally elevate every part of our lives, our interactions, our homes, our businesses, our relationships. Every part of us could be elevated. And elevated means that it will now, those parts of our lives will now draw their energy directly from godliness. And when we engage in these activities, we're drawing energy from godliness. Imagine all day you are drawing energy from godliness and you're transferring energy to godliness. And when we talk about, illuminating your part of the world, that's literally how you do it. You're looking at what areas of the world of life you have access to, and you're illuminating them, you're elevating them. Thoughts or questions before we sign off? So I want to end off with one line. There's a famous line that's used among Hasidim, which is interesting because it definitely sounds easier than it really is, using everything for the right reason. People who really want to remain sensitive, because it's very easy to become desensitized, right? Once I start indulging in beautiful vacations, the first time I took a vacation, it's like, oh yeah, I'm doing this to, for this reason. And it becomes pretty easy to just become desensitized. So there's a line among Hasidim that in Yiddish, I'll say it in Yiddish and I'll translate. Was mitarnit terminit und was memeg darf man nicht. What is not allowed is not allowed. What's not allowed is off the table. We don't engage with those things. What is permissible, we don't need that either. So I'm not going to take something that's permissible and say it's not allowed. No, if it's something that I have the ability to use for the right way, great. But just indulging in things that are accessible and permissible, but are not serving specifically a godly purpose, even if they're not negative, I will try to avoid those things. I will not, and people who really, make the Tanya their life and take it very seriously, they'll be cautious about just indulging in just delicious food for the sake of indulgence. If they'll see like good food, they'll try really hard not to just like, oh, it's just so good, I just want to eat it. Like they really will try to hold themselves back and say, wait, is this permitted? If it's not permitted, it's off the table. If it's permitted, is there a way to use this for a godly purpose? If there is, great. If there isn't, then I'm going to hold back because I want to maintain that sensitivity so that when I see things around me, I'm able to discern, where I'm going with it, what I'm doing with it. And I don't want to just get lost in this game of hide and seek where I forget to even look. So withholding just self-absorbent, self-indulgent pleasures for the sake of pleasure is a way of just keeping our eyes on the goal. Again, if we have the ability to use it in a good way, 100% we should use it in a good way. But in general, trying to kind of take a step back before indulging in something and saying, wait, why am I really doing this? Where is this coming from? What am I trying to get to with this? That helps keep us mindful, as they say in 2024. And we can live our lives in a more mindful way. And that affects all areas of our life. And as Tanya tells us, definitely the spiritual part of our lives as well. Thoughts, ideas, questions? All right, next week is chapter 7. No, we just did chapter 7. Next week is chapter 8. Chapter 8 is really the last chapter talking about just what we call the anatomy of the soul. Chapter 9 really begins to start talking about the struggles. So whereas these chapters are kind of still breaking down what's the soul made of and how does it work, in chapter 9, the Tanya starts telling us, okay, so this is what the struggle is, this is what we face, and really becomes more practical in a way. But I will still, if we want to take a practical takeaway for the week, then I would say for this week, try to find yourself when you're about to engage in an activity, a mundane activity, not a mitzvah specifically, any mundane activity. See if you can stop and ask yourself, why am I doing this? What am I doing this for? Where is this coming from? Is this coming from my godly soul or from my animal soul? And see if you can find ways to really elevate mundane activities. Do the same shopping, but do it with a different mindset, or the same, whatever activity it's going to be, but do it with a mindset that you're doing it for a holy reason, and see how that feels different and how that affects your interactions. Have a good night. Have a good week. Good to see you all.
Thanks, Jeannie. Good class. Very, very good class.
Agreed. Yes, thank you.
It was wonderful.
Good night.